Are you at a crossroads in your life? Are you? Are you wondering what's next and hoping it'll be a step in the right direction? I don't know. Welcome to Your Next Bold Move. Our show is all about helping you take your next step, whether it's career or relationships or life in general. Second acts do exist. Second chances do exist. And so stay tuned and let's explore together what's next for you. Hi, and welcome to Your Next Bold Move. My name is Wendy Kaplan. Our TV show is about providing you with inspiration and information to help you figure out what's next for you and then to make that bold move. Bold moves can be personal or professional, but whatever it is for you, let us help you get started and get supported. Today's show is focused on entrepreneurial thought and action, and our guest is Charlie Kiefer. Charlie is president of Innovation Associates and co-author of the new book published by the Harvard Business Review, Just Start: How to Succeed at Work and Life in an Increasingly Unpredictable World. Charlie is a regular advisor to global companies on leveraging the human side of their enterprises and a brilliant thinker on how to go about starting entrepreneurial ventures. So why don't we start off by your telling us a little bit about your background and how you got into this work on entrepreneurship to begin with.
Well, it was a kind of, it's not that an unusual a story. Actually, I graduated from college. I went to work for one of my professors, and after a couple of years, they fired me. And and I was saying, well, what am I going to do next? So I found a company or two that wanted to hire me as a consultant. And one thing led to another, and we created a very successful little company that in 1995 I sold. Then the company I sold it to went bankrupt. So throughout this period, I was just engaged in helping organizations improve. And then when the company went bankrupt, I bought my little firm back, and a couple of years later, I ran into Len Schlesinger, who was then at that point just becoming president of Babson College. And one of the things I do with my clients is I act sort of as a sounding board and help them think. So I called up Len and said, "How you doing? Come on over." I was looking for a place for my daughter to go to business school, and Babson, of course, is the leading school in the world for entrepreneurial activities. So I thought this would be a pretty cool place for her. And one thing led to another, and Len was immersing himself in the study of entrepreneurship. I mean, he had a long career in academia at the Harvard Business School, and then also and then as a chief operating officer of Limited Brands. In any case, he was new to entrepreneurial theory, and ran across this book by Sarah Sarasvathy of the University of Virginia, and said, "Charlie, you got to read this." So I read this book of hers. And I was 3 or 4 chapters into it, and I really didn't understand why Len wanted me to read this. And then about the 4th chapter, it all began to make sense to me. And I realized that this was the first book or anything about entrepreneurs that I had ever read that really reflected how I thought about things. And for the first time, my thinking process was clear to me. And I just got very excited about it, and Len said, well, we need to really go into this, and so why don't we teach a course on it? So that's where you and I met.
Right.
You know, the 3rd or 4th course, we just got 15, 20, 30 people together and said, well, we'll learn by teaching.
And you were running these courses, how long, 2 years, a year and a half?
Well, we started doing about every month or two, and mostly for our own edification and learning,
Yes.
and we were at it about a year, and then Len said, well, why don't we write a book about it?
Right.
So he had a friend that was a professional writer, and that was Paul Brown. And Paul came on. It was too early. We didn't have the ideas really nailed yet.
Yes.
So it was a lot of work. But we wrote this book. We decided in February we wanted to write a book, and in August we were done.
That's
We decided not to go the traditional publishing route because, frankly, it was just going to take too long, and we thought if the thing was worth anything, we needed to get it out there earlier than that.
So let's plug the book. It's called Just Start.
Well, this is the second one. You see, Action Trumps Everything was the first book,
Right.
And then Harvard Business Press came along and said, we'd like to publish the real version. So we wrote it a bit, updated it. It's a lot better book. And so thanks for plugging the book.
There you go, and people can get this on Amazon. And the book is especially great for people who are either in an entrepreneurial venture, in business for themselves, want to be in business for themselves, because it walks them through the process, right?
The beauty of this whole thing, and we fell on it, but the beauty of this whole thing is we started coming out of entrepreneurs and realized that the logic that these successful serial entrepreneurs use, that Sarasvathy identified in her research, was applicable anywhere in life that you're faced with high levels of uncertainty. And
Which is mostly
everybody now, right? I
Right.
mean, and so the next series of books or whatever we're doing is basically going to extend these ideas and say, okay, you know, you've got a job right now. Is it that safe? What should you be doing to prepare yourself in case your company craters? Or let's say you want to start something on the side, which we actually
Right.
think is a good idea. It could be used virtually anywhere that you're faced with large amounts of unknowability.
Right. And there are so many people now, because of the economy, because of the baby boomers being at a certain age in their career life cycle, that people have either been moved out of their jobs, their companies have been acquired, there's been mergers, or they've just decided, you know, I've been doing this for 25, 30 years, I don't know if I want to do it anymore. What could I do? So I think it's perfectly timed for people who are on the edge of what's next
Right.
for themselves.
And the message is so simple, you know, you think you have to plan a lot, you need to know a lot, and all that kind of, and so no, if you really look at an effective stance to take in the face of unknowability or high levels of uncertainty, is just start. I mean, I can illustrate that
Yes,
very
let's
simply.
do that, yeah.
I mean, so first, let's imagine, you know, you and your husband Chris, you live, I don't know where, let's say west of Boston, west of town, and let's say you don't, but let's say you worked in Boston, and you guys decided to pick up and move somewhere else,
To the Seaport District.
to the Seaport District or something like
I
that.
want to go to the Seaport District.
There you go. Well, there you go. Okay, so now, so you arrive in your new apartment or your new house in the Seaport District, and you've got to get to work the next day.
Right.
What's the logic you use to get, or what are the steps that you would use in order to make your way to work? So what would you do?
You Google Map,
Mm-hmm.
you go on to your phone and do direction, navigation,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe you look at the MBTA schedule and the line and what
Mm-hmm.
stop goes where, and
Right. So in general, you know where you want to go.
Right.
You know where you are, and there are various ways of getting there.
Right.
Okay. And you're going to catalog, if you will, all of those ways, and then what you're going to do is you're going to try to, well, which one's best for me? I'm going to be able to optimize the route against what's important to me. Do I want to stay off the subways? What about traffic in the morning?
Right.
All of that kind of stuff. And then once you've determined all of that, if you need to buy a car or a token or a Charlie Pass or something like that,
Right.
then you'll buy it, and you'll get everything necessary, and at that point you'll go.
yeah, it's sort of like step by step.
Very logical.
Right.
And it works perfectly when you're dealing with stuff that's really well known in advance. It's what
Right.
we've been taught in school. The elegant thing about the known environment is you actually can, in principle, pick the optimal route, the perfect route.
Right. It's sort of like when you take some classes, career development classes, they say, set some goals. What are your goals? And then let's put together a plan to reach those goals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Which sometimes work and sometimes don't.
let's come back to that. But I mean, it's exactly the process if you went to business school in most places 5 or 10 years ago and longer, they would say that you would need to do if you were starting a company.
Right, right.
And
Have to get
maybe in
your
a little bit,
MBA
I'll tell
and-
you how when you take a look at these successful entrepreneurs that Sarasvathy studied, that's not what they did, you know. But before we get there, think about what happens now if instead of center of Boston, where everything is relatively known, you woke up in the middle of a forest. You don't know where you are.
You don't know how you got there, you just woke up there.
You just woke up,
Okay.
right? And the only thing maybe is you hear faint sounds of children playing somewhere far off in the distance.
Okay.
What logic do you use now?
Assuming you want to get out?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Do you want to get out?
Oh, I don't know. Well,
Maybe you like it where you are.
well, right. So what's the question? What do you do?
Well, let's say you did. Let's say you don't like it where you are. You'd like to get back. Maybe there's not enough food around to sustain you. You say, I'm in a little bit of trouble. I better get going. What's the logic?
I don't know. Trial and error. Oh, well, if you happen to have a phone with
Okay,
you,
so yeah, what else are you doing? So you're going to look around and you're going to see, what do I have?
what's there?
What's available at my disposal right now?
Right.
Right.
Based on what you see, and what you hear. Maybe there's something about those faint children's sounds in the background.
Right.
Right.
So there's some resources. There are some resources at your disposal.
Right.
So you're going to take stock of those. Maybe you're going to holler for help.
Right.
Right. Maybe there's some people around that could help you.
Right.
And then what are you going to do? Are you going to sit and think anymore beyond that?
Probably not. You're probably just gonna start.
Yeah, you're going to take a step now. Are you going to take a big monster step?
No, you probably might try something and see if that works.
Right. You're going to take small steps,
Right.
each one of which is, to your best of your abilities, fully recoverable, that you could at least return to where you were. In other words, you want to stay alive in order to stay in the game,
Right.
right? And after each step, what are you going to do at that point? Plan?
I don't know. Maybe see how that went and whether it was
Exactly.
a good idea or not.
Right. You're going to learn from what happened. You're going to take stock of what's now in front of you, new resources perhaps,
Right.
maybe a new opportunity. Who knows? Maybe there's something else you want. Maybe you're now in a happy place and you decide, I don't want to go anywhere.
Right.
But each step of the way,
Right.
you're going to learn something, you're going to take stock, and then you're going to build off what you find.
Right.
There's no fiction going on here. Everything is based on reality.
So this is the point,
Mm-hmm.
right? What we were talking about earlier, that in an unknowable, uncertain world, which we live in now, the point is to take a step and take a look around and then see how it worked out.
Yeah, and the step that you want to take is a small one. I want to come back to that when I walk
Okay.
you through the logic of entrepreneurs. But essentially, the more unknowable, the more you have to act your way into the future, and the less sense it makes to think your way into it.
That's good, because so many people spend all this time, I don't know, planning and working out all these scenarios, and I suppose it's good to do that too to some degree, but at some point you have to just get going.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So let's circle back to what you said a minute ago, if now's a good time, in regard to what the research said.
Okay, so if you look at Sarasvathi's research, which was just monstrously good, and she started with thousands of successful entrepreneurs and finally boiled it down to a sample of 30 that she then went out and interviewed extensively. And these are people that had started major businesses of $250 million to $6 billion. I
So
mean,
big businesses.
Yeah, really big,
Yeah.
successful by any metric that you'd want.
Yeah.
And what she did that was very interesting, most of the research, and I'm certainly not an expert in this, but most of what I had read was all about how entrepreneurs behaved and whether they were, whether everybody says, well, they're visionary and, they're very creative and they're able to discern the future and they're highly self-confident. And the big one, of course, is that they just have a high appetite for risk. Well, it turns out under the microscope of actually looking that most of those things aren't true. That, first of all, entrepreneurs as a class of people are relatively risk averse, at least compared to bankers. Bankers are more risky than entrepreneurs.
That's wild.
Now, entrepreneurs are very clever at reducing the risk to as close to zero as possible. And when I heard this, of course, I said, geez, that's exactly me. I never thought when I was starting out 3 companies that I had an appetite for risk.
Right.
Never thought
And
that.
a lot of people think they can't start a business because they're conservative or they don't want to risk too much. And in fact, you don't have to.
Exactly.
Right.
Right. And if in the elegance of what we've termed acceptable loss, which is one of the elements of these entrepreneurial thinking, is that each step you take has got to be in something that you would be willing just to lose. It's like, okay,
Willing to lose,
I can put that much money, that much time, that much of my reputation, whatever seems to be
Right.
the currencies for me. I can try that. If it doesn't work out, it's fine. I can walk away from
Right.
it. Now, what that does is psychologically drop your risk to zero.
Right.
And practically, it reduces it enormously as well. So these entrepreneurs go through life and they don't think of themselves as terribly risky because in their view,
They're
and
not.
it certainly was in mine, it wasn't.
Right.
But all my friends thought I was really risky,
Right. Isn't
which
that
I always thought was
interesting?
funny.
Yeah.
So what Sarasvathy did is she went one level back into the thought process and said, not how do these entrepreneurs behave, not are they visionary or creative or risky, and they're not terribly visionary. Sometimes they start with a very, just a general direction, no clear vision. So there's a lot of things there, but what she basically did is she went back and she studied how they thought. And she came up with some stuff that was remarkably consistent across her sample of 30 people and stood in marked contrast with how, say, middle managers and everybody else thought about life.
Interesting. Do you want to bullet those things?
Sure.
Yeah.
And they basically are the same things that you identified just a minute ago when you were faced with the fourth situation, right?
Yeah.
So the first element is it's born of desire. So you start with desire, and it really makes no sense to go into the unknown unless you want to. So, I mean, in the known, if you want to get away from something you don't want, do it in the known environment. Do something which is going to lead you certainly what you want.
Right.
But if you're really faced with something unknown, there's no reason to go there unless you really want to. Now, here's the thing. Everybody thinks that entrepreneurs have to have enormous amounts of passion, and they certainly write their stories that way in Forbes magazine 10 years later.
Yeah.
But most of them, or many of them, didn't when they started. They just had a vague notion of where they wanted to go.
So it's okay if you're not like over the top excited about something in particular.
I think this myth about that you have to be passionate at the outset, I think it's number one, it's false. And number two, it causes an enormous amount of people to edit themselves out of entrepreneurial activity.
I think that's so true. I think so many people edit themselves out because they think they can't or they don't meet some criteria that they've read about or they're afraid.
Right. So you got to want it at some level.
Yeah.
And it'll build over time. So it's like, seeing a cute girl, you go out on a date, you go steady, you get married. And if you're lucky, the desire and the passion builds over time, right?
That could lead us down in a whole nother conversation.
So desire is really central. And the second, maybe the second element or the first that Sarasvathy identified is you want to act quickly with the means at hand, with the emphasis here at means at hand. When you're in the unknown, you don't know what's going to be useful. You know what you've got in front of you.
Right.
You're going to figure out what can you do, what step can you take in favor of your desire based on what you've got right now, right?
Right.
In predictable, you wait until you get all the resources in place, where you can go figure out what they are, and you better not act until you get them. In the unknown, you just get started with what you've got.
Right.
Second big principle was the notion of acceptable loss.
Right.
And
How much can you afford to lose?
how much can you afford, and are you willing to lose? And those
Right.
can be different questions.
Right.
So you may have a lot of money, but you might not want to spend it.
Right.
So it's a trade-off between, well, it's not a trade-off, but it's an and. You got to have
Right.
what you want or what you're capable of, and the second is what you want.
Yeah.
And the currency is rather unusual. Most of us think about money and time as the major elements of entrepreneurial activity, but the third one is
I
reputational
was
capital.
thinking about that, right?
And your family, the relationship with your family.
Right.
And then what's the cost of doing this? Because it means you can't do something else.
Right.
So all of these things go into the calculation of acceptable loss. And the wonderful thing about acceptable loss is that it takes a whole host of unknowns and renders them known, because you know how much money you have, you know how much time you have, you know how much of your reputation you want to put on the line.
Right.
You know all of those things. So in the traditional way of thinking about business, you're dealing with unknowns all the time. Acceptable loss says we can convert all of the relevant things to known. And then the second thing is, of course, it's very personal. I would look at this situation. We might be faced with the same situation, and your acceptable loss could be entirely different than mine. It could be entirely different when you're 20 than when you're 60, than when you're 40.
Right.
Totally subjective, totally personal, and totally knowable in this moment,
Yep.
right? The third thing is you're going to bring other people along. These entrepreneurs are just great at sweeping lots of people up. A good chunk of people bring tangible resources and money and all that kind of stuff, but they're also really good at a phenomenon we call enrollment, which is how you get other people excited about what you're doing. And the elegance of enrollment is that if I can get you excited about something, the likelihood of you telling somebody else about it is very high.
Right. Like when I came to your class.
Exactly.
That you and Len did. I went 7 times, I think.
And you must have sent 18 or 20 people.
At least.
Yeah,
I know.
right.
I loved it. I
Yeah.
thought it was great.
Yeah. So that's the number 3. And then the fourth we've already talked about, which is you build off what you find.
Right.
Now, if I go back to the predictable universe, if you encounter something that you didn't plan for, you were an idiot. You should have figured that out.
Right.
You should have been able to foresee that. Big mistake. You better go fix that. In the unpredictable universe is where these serial entrepreneurs play. Wow, what can I do with that? I mean, I may now know something nobody else in the world knows. What can I do with it? I could build it into my product. So they befriend reality. They're converting all the time. They're converting obstacles and problems into assets. And they're trying to figure out what can I do with this? And then they're taking their next step from there.
That's great.
And the next step can be one of two things. It can be another step in favor of what I wanted,
Right.
or sometimes, because I've now accumulated
Learn
some
some
new
things,
resources,
right.
And I've got new, but sometimes I have a new opportunity in front of me.
Right.
And I'm looking at that and I say, geez, that's more fun. I think that would be a little cooler. And so they pivot and they go off in a different direction.
Well, just to use yourself and the work that you've done with Len as an example, you started off by teaching these courses because these ideas were really interesting. And from that, you wrote a book. And from that, or maybe along with that, you now have this online version that's about to come out. And so it's, I don't know, it's sort of morphed. You know, what started off as just, let's pull together 25 to 30 people and talk about these concepts and teach some things. Now look,
Right.
So,
And
and
it-
you didn't plan any of that.
Not a bit. I mean, honestly, we didn't. You know, Len and I thought we would do this course for a year or two. And then after we did it a few times, we said, this is really cool and people seem to be liking it.
Right.
And then we ran into about a year or so later, it's like, well, wait a second now. There are a lot of people in this world and not all of them are going to fly to, Wellesley, Massachusetts to do our course.
Right.
So then we began to say, well, what else could we do? And the idea of the online course came out, which turned out to have a whole host of technical problems. But if we solve them, and I think we have, if we solve them, it's going to be pretty neat for people.
That's great. And you also told me as we were getting ready for today that you're thinking about bringing this work into corporations and working with companies who want to work through the process of entrepreneurial thinking in order to work their business stuff. So,
Yeah, and large corporations are really interesting. We have one that we're working with right now, really a pioneer, I'd have to say, in as a compliment to them, because
that's great.
everything, in my view, everything about the large Western corporation is actually antithetical and inimical to the kind of logic we've been talking about here.
Yeah, it's
I
true.
mean, large corporations
true.
exist on predictability. You can't scale something that's not predictive.
Right.
And the mantra, if you will, of maximizing shareholder wealth causes organizations to stamp out anything that smacks of variability.
Right.
And yet the just start or act, learn, build ideas are fundamentally going to cause disruptions in smoothness,
Right.
right? So it's very tough
Yeah.
in a large corporation. But
Yeah.
we're going to figure our way around that. We know some of the leverage points there.
That's great. So we have a few minutes left. Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that would be really important for people who are thinking about starting a venture or already have a small business or even work for a large business that could use these concepts that would be helpful?
Well, I mean, at the sort of the top level, no. I mean, it's really this simple, Wendy. I mean, it really is. It's like, if there's something that you want, well, if
Let's walk through the steps
yeah,
again.
if there's
right?
something you want and you're in the unknown, then applying predictive logic that permeates our educations and our organizations doesn't make logical sense. It leads you to the wrong conclusions and it could be ultimately dangerous, right?
Right.
So in those situations, you want to use this sort of act, learn, build kind of idea. Now, as you act, learn, and build, you're going to learn more and more. And the more you learn, the more you're going to be able to bring prediction in. So this is not, oh, I'm just going to throw thinking to the winds. This is, I'm going to act my way into the future and I'm going to create evidence as I go along. And the evidence that I create is going to be fodder for my analytics, if you will.
Right.
Right. And so the metaphor, if you will, is not either prediction or act, learn, build. The metaphor is to become bilingual.
Right, so two kinds of reasoning. And this is a good time to put up the slide on two kinds of reasoning. So predictive, planning, planful, and how you act through the unknown,
Right.
right?
And
both.
And you're going to be just like if you were going to, and you knew Spanish, and you were going to a cocktail party, and you walked up to somebody who who spoke Spanish. You just shift from English to Spanish, and then we'd turn to the next
Right.
person. You'd go back to
A
English.
toolbox
Right.
where you pull out when you need it.
Right.
And it's not either or. I
Right.
think that's one of the biggest learning that I had is it's not either or.
Right.
There are times when you need one, and there are other times when you need another.
But they really are different, and this is the thing. I mean, you can put up that slide now of the sort of the dramatization, because
Yes.
if you look at predictive logic, you start with an endpoint, you go to where it is, off you go, and you stay right on track. If you don't, if you get off track, you get right back on it.
Right.
And if you're a little smarter than that, you get off track, then you form a new goal. You don't form a new goal, but you form a new path.
Right.
But there's really a different contrast in what we'll call Act, Learn, Build, and that looks like the second animation. And you can see how different these look just by putting them side by side.
Yes.
Right? But what the real difference is what happens in each of these logics when you encounter an impenetrable obstacle.
Instead of jumping ship, it's just
You make your way around it.
right, just deciding what to do. I have one of the great things that I got from the classes that I sat through was listing out all the obstacles that I was facing on the thing that I was working on, and then just talking to people about, well, what solutions, well, first of all, what solutions could I come up with? When I actually sat down and thought about it, instead of thinking about it in terms of an obstacle that, oh my God, I don't know what to do, there was actually a lot of possible solutions that came like in a blink.
Right.
So, and then getting other people's input on it. So
We said most of the obstacles we face in life is because of our thinking.
I know, we do this to ourselves. I
Right.
mean, this
And
is
we
true
don't
in
see a
life.
way around it, right?
Right.
But anybody on the outside could look at this and
Right.
see something that we don't see.
That's right. Well,
Right.
because we're in the middle of it,
You're
so
in the
it's
middle
harder
of it,
to
yeah,
see.
yeah.
Which is one of the reasons I've, about the same time I started taking these courses, I started putting together what I'm calling a board of advisors for my two businesses, so that I can get other fresh thoughts and other thinking that has really made a huge difference. So I say for anybody, pull together an informal board of advisors of people that you think are smart, that either know something about your business or that don't. Because even if they don't know something about your business, if they're good thinkers, it can be really valuable.
Absolutely. And you don't even need to do that. At least our experience is go down to your local Starbucks, grab two people, buy them a cup of coffee, and ask your question and see what they talk about. I mean, it's literally somebody that thinks about it differently than you is very likely to see a path right around whatever's stalling you.
I suppose that's true. Well, I'm making it more complicated than it needs to be. Well, I am so glad that our time is up. It flew by today, but I'm so glad that you were here, and I'm so delighted that, first of all, I love this book, Just Start, and I've read it and I'm giving it to clients, and it reads, I said this to you before, it reads exactly like I'm sitting in the class with the two of you. And so I highly recommend it, and I'm so glad that you were here, and I so appreciate your time and coming.
Thanks, Wendy.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for watching today. You've just had a chance to hear Charlie Kiefer, President of Innovation Associates and co-author of the newly published book by Harvard Business Review called Just Start, which outlines step-by-step how to take action, embrace uncertainty, and create the future. And if you want to know more about this topic and this book, you can go to Amazon.com where you can purchase the book. And if you're someone who's looking for more information on leadership development, we have some free resources for you on our website at www.visionquestconsulting.com. Thanks for joining us today. And in addition to the resources and ideas shared with us by our guests, you can also go online to our other community for some free support and inspiration at www.themagicparties.com. Thanks so much for joining us, and we are looking forward to seeing you next time. And a big thank you to our guest, Charlie Kiefer, and thanks to Pete and Pat and our production crew, Dan, who made our show possible today. Thanks to all of you, our listeners. You are meant to go forth in the world to use your gifts and talents and to have a little fun exploring what's next inside of you, just waiting to burst forth. Join us next time as we continue to inspire each other to make our next bold moves.